Today I'm going to be talking about new way of envisioning security in the dependencies. That's a fun way of figuring out what issues we can see, what we are seeing in the current area. And the most important part is that why are we even talking about dependencies? That's what we are going to be discussing and the issues that we have seen in the past. So let me tell you an interesting thing here. When I talk about dependencies, I actually talk about the issues which are there. And while we get into it, let me just introduce myself. I'm Vandana Verma, currently taking care of security relations at SNI. I'm also one of the global board of directors at OWASP, which is Open Web Application Security Project, a big community around application security, and OWASP.10 to testing guide to security knowledge framework and whatnot. I'm also leading certain diversity initiatives in India and outside, InfoSec girls, kids, and diversity to bring in diverse people, the right content for them. And here I am speaking about the topic. Let me just go ahead and get straight into it. Now, what do you see here? You see the futuristic image that we envision, that we want at home. Like I have devices which I can speak to, I can request them something, and they do the stuff for me. And it is good. It is making lives easy. But then what happens when there is some malicious content which is getting uploaded somewhere, or there's some content which is getting uploaded somewhere? We don't know what's getting uploaded at what place. So there are content which is getting uploaded. And if in case that content is going to some malicious place, or while we are updating a patch at that particular time, we see something which is going ahead and uploading all my data, or in case the camera is getting on and we are getting tracked, how scary that would be. It'll be very scary. We have kids, we have elders, we have who not at home. We have our own privacy. And that's what is becoming big these days. So while we talk about all of this, how developers play a role in security incidents to making it much more better, and how does the software supply chain landscape look like today, and why should we care about software security or even the dependencies? Here, developers are becoming malware distribution vehicle. People don't assume that, yes, it is going to be that, but then there are cases like even stream incident. What happens to that? So it all started in 2011, and it went on. Like people were using this event stream package, and they were leveraging it. But suddenly there is an infected version that comes into picture, and people start using that infected version. Now, how scary that would be for me to use an impacted version. And this is not the only incident. Now, there's another thing that plays a very big role here, that how much do we really know about our own dependencies while we are dealing with such issues? So for example, if I talk about my own app, this is my app. And if I talk about my code, this is the code that I have, like just this much. So 80 to 90% of the code on the internet is open source, and rest of the code is the custom code that we write, maybe even less. So think about the situation wherein if this much of a code is just our code and rest is open source, do we not need to care about the open source code? Absolutely. And then on top of it, attacking the heart of developer tooling. So the tools that we use, they are getting attacked. For example, we use Visual Studio Code. I use it day in and day out. And there was a vulnerability which was reported in it, wherein the attackers were able to get the access to the whole GitHub repositories, to modifying it and managing it. And that turns out there's another portion to it. How do we take care of this open source security? What is even the state of open source security? And that comes the issues, the resolution time. And the most important part is that, for example, this cross-site scripting vulnerability in a JavaScript Markdown parser, when was it reported? You can see that it was reported in May 2015. But when was it fixed? It was fixed in 2016. So that was a very big time. The important piece to consider is that when the people are working on these open source projects, they're spending their time. They're making sure that their valuable time is being taken into consideration. And a lot of times they get busy. There are not enough volunteers to support for these open source projects. And that's when the issue comes. And these things actually lead to a lot of further issues. Now, let me take you to an issue which happened a few years back, wherein Apache was vulnerable. Now, every vulnerable project that gets updated, and it's not just with Apache, but then the onus lies on us to make sure that when there is a new version that comes up, we have to keep it up to date. And how we can do it? We need to keep a repository of it. There are times when we are not fast enough to detect it because we don't know what we have in our repository, and that becomes a trouble. At the same time, when we don't know how we can respond to it because we are not able to detect it, and we don't know which all applications are using it. There's another example that I want to talk about is compromising those maintainers' account. While those maintainers are actually taking care of those repositories, if somebody compromises their accounts, what will happen? And in 2017, there was a research which was done on weak credentials, and it was done by an NPM.js, but then it can happen with any organization. So they published that 14% of the whole ecosystem module uses a very insecure password. And while they use it, there are many other vulnerabilities that keep coming up. So this sudo vulnerability, which allowed attackers to gain access. Now, sudo has been in use for a very long time. Like we've been using it for over 10 years, like it's a decade. And then comes a point wherein how critical that would be. So any unprivileged user can gain access to the vulnerable host. And it doesn't stop there. Like I'm telling you the different scenarios which are coming up here. And then it leaves us with a lot of issues. It leaves us with a lot of concerns that how are we managing our own resources, our own projects, to our own tool sets that we have. And then comes supply chain attacks. So when 2020 was about to end, we saw SolarWinds attack, wherein there were issues in the SolarWinds ecosystem. And at that point of time, we realized that supply chain attacks are being very, very critical. But then weren't they there before? They were there before. It's just that we started to recognize them because they're becoming too big now. And aren't we trying to address those issues? We are. There are still gaps which are there. Think about this, wherein maintainers themselves remove the libraries. I am using a project which is an open source project. I love the project. My application, my organization runs on that project. And then suddenly somebody says, oh, I don't want to put in my effort. I don't want to maintain this repository. And then issues like this happens. And that's when it hits us hard that we need to handle these things really well. And what's inside these registries, we all don't know because we don't scan them, or sometimes we don't even know it. So there are issues which are there. And then comes this Python package includes so many malicious libraries. And is it just the case with Python? No, it is the case with many, many other organizations. I'll tell you a very, very recent case when we talk about these dependency confusions and issues. Now, we are going to have less or more software which is secure. Think about it. On January 8th, this year, like just a few days before, maintainer of caller and faker libraries, which are very much crucial part of Node.js and JavaScript ecosystem, the maintainer pulled his hands off. Now, how? For caller, there was an updated version that was part of the update, and that created an infinite loop. So whenever you are implementing or using the package as part of the source code, it will create an infinite loop, which will lead to denial of service attack. How scary that is for the maintainers or the people who are using it, right? Now, similarly for Faker, the version came out and there was nothing as part of the repo, and build started to break. That brings us to the point that how are we leveraging these open source softwares? How are we managing it? Talk about this Log4j, which is a very popular Apache logging framework written in Java. And everyone was going crazy last whole month. And everybody was thinking whether we are vulnerable or not, where we are vulnerable, how it is. And even the vendors, like everyone went crazy to services, to everyone. Like we were on calls, we were taking these live sessions. And if we don't regulate them, what are the risks? Absolutely, regulatory compliance. There are failures which are happening. Then remote code execution. I can get access to all of your code. How beautiful that would be. Then increase insider threat, because we know that there are things which are vulnerable, which we are not able to manage. And then comes impact. Could be a ransomware. I've seen cases where there is an updated system or updated version which has come up, which includes a crypto mining software. Think about it. Data is getting exfiltrated. There's a lot of integrity loss which is there, especially for these two projects that we are talking about, Caller and Faker. Now we're talking about how we can actually solve this. Comes a point, let's go back to the older version, which is a good one. But then, is there any alternate? So there's an alternate called Shock, which is there. But then it is not available all the time when we are talking about open source versions. And then with this Log4j, it is very popular. People are using it. It's a zero-day vulnerability. It's making people crazy. So it is imperative that we start addressing these issues. We start considering these dependencies and take it in a way that we are addressing the concerns which are there. When we try and hack an app, let me show you something. Okay, so here I have a simple Node.js application, which is just one page. And this is, I'm running locally. It is just one file that I'm running locally. And if one file is impacted, it can actually lead to a huge concern. Now, this rec query that I'm using here, this is actually part of the Express 4.x framework. Now, this is not the problem with the Express framework or Express library, but then the problem is actually how we call certain functions or how we actually assign the permissions to them. Now, if I use it as like a simple parameter, it will be escaped, because if you see there is a sanitize function here on my screen, and I am going to be escaping it. But then if I put it in an array, if I put these brackets in front of it, then it will be considered a totally different thing. And anything that I'm going to be putting, it will be escaped because the validation is being escaped. And that is a huge, huge concern with certain libraries, which we need to look at. And let me show you straight into this while I talk about it, that I can actually execute cross-site scripting in it. And I can take care of a lot of issues here. Now, while I move to next step, shift left, we've been talking about it for a very long time now, like a few years, I can say that. But is it enough? No, it is not enough. We need to make sure that dev environments are built in a way that whenever there is an issue comes, people know these are the things that I am looking at. This is the inventory. Even if someone is on off or sleeping, still people can actually manage that. At the same time, we need to look for communities which can help. So OWASP is one community, which is an open source community, which can help, which has free resources. There are needs that happens. And there are organizations which are helping with these dependencies. There are issues in AppSec. There are issues in these dependencies, but we can manage it. We can pin them. We can make it part of the package.json files, or we can make them part of the whole index system where we can club them, understand that these are the things that we are using. And attackers are targeting open source very widely. If there's one vulnerability, it is not just impacting one person or one organization. It is impacting everyone, literally everyone who's using it. At the same time, application security is becoming challenging, but then there is one foot we have in the open source, we have in the cloud native environments. If we use them wisely, if we use them responsibly, then yes, the things are going to be really, really amazing for us. And what if we make it easier for the developers? Make it developer friendly, actionable. And that's when best practices for open source comes into picture. We can't enforce security on people. I have interacted with a lot of developers. There are different challenges that they are facing. The most important one is that we enforce everything on them rather than educating them, rather than sharing these details with them. If there is a bug comes, oh, you have to fix it. Oh, let them understand what it is and where all they can find it so that they can fix it, because they know the ecosystem really well. So it is very, very important. And it is awesome, but then let's use it responsibly. And let's have security champions, the people who can actually speak for us. Now, who are those people? These people are actually who are the focal points. Whenever there is something, we can go to them. And it does not need to be the person from security team. It is the person who is working actually in the developer team, or testers, or the people who are key people on bringing all those applications or features. And it has to be an influencer who has to come from the team, from security team, who can actually enable people understand that, yes, this is a person who can be a security champion. And it does not have to be enforcement. It has to come from within. And when it comes from within, it has to come from executives as well, wherein they provide sponsorship, because it needs time. And how do we structure this champions program? We need to have defined activities, what we're going to be doing, what all those volunteers will be doing. Will there be a security representation who will be taking on or who will be helping with that program? Do we have a responsibility for security team as well? And are we meeting it regularly, or is it just one-off meeting, or we are meeting once a month? We are just getting lost what we discussed in the last meeting. So it is important we discuss them. We have a program management, and the most important, rewards and recognition. How are we trying to address that? And are we trying to motivate them to do these things? Measured goals. It is very, very important to measure those regulations and the things that we are doing. It is very, very important to measure ourselves while everyone is doing that. But it is important to measure where we were and where we are right now, so that we can improve the program. There are programs which are dying because we are not measuring in the right way. So let's have some programs set up in a right way. What does a security champion do? Interact with everyone, understand what are practices which we have, take on the responsibilities, security issues which are identified, and anyone can be that. Developer, DevOps manager, security analyst, motivating people. And they need to make sure that they have problem solving skills. They are integrated into the open source security. They understand what open source is. And like I tell you, another important aspect, that there are times there are issues in the project, but we don't know how to solve it. So it took me, so when I was working for this code review project, we were just setting up the whole agile framework, DevSecOps framework. It took me good 6 months to have that faith with them, or to have them to trust me that, yes, I'm not a roadblocker, but an enabler for them. And we need to work on it together to solve all the issues that we are seeing. If there is a new bug that comes up, we will be working on it together rather than just forcing it to you. And if there is any conflict between the teams, or there is anything that cannot be fixed, we will work on it together. So this is something which I had in mind regarding the dependencies, but let's work on it together. Let's work on it to fix it, and we can sail on it together. Thank you so much for listening to me. Please do feel free to reach out to me on my social media handles, InfoSec Vandana, or you can reach me on LinkedIn. I am very much active. I'll be happy to have a conversation around these topics with you.